Hi. Hello, I'm Helen. I'm from GP Putnam Sons, and it is a joy to share this Friday morning with you. I want to start by saying thank you to each of you for being here and for the irreplaceable work that you do in our communities. We're all so grateful. Many of you may already be familiar with Camille Perri's first novel, The Assistants, which Putnam published in May of 2016. The story of a group of young women who find and take the opportunity to pay off their student loans in a most unorthodox way. The novel clearly hit a nerve. It was beloved by booksellers, librarians, the media, and readers alike. As a young woman living and working in New York City, reading The Assistants made me feel like I had truly been seen. I could not stop talking about it. So when I heard Camille was writing her next novel, I was very curious what she would tackle. When you've made student loans laugh out loud funny, where do you go next? It turns out Camille knew exactly where. In When Katie Met Cassidy, Camille again highlights the importance of women taking the reins, only this time it's in their search for love, sex, and self-acceptance. The novel follows Katie Daniels, a perfection-seeking 28-year-old lawyer who has been living the New York dream. But when we first meet her, she's standing alone in an empty apartment. Her fiancé has left her, and despite her ambitious career, Katie feels lost. It's a moment I think so many can relate to, when our vision of how things should go comes crashing down around us, and we're left to pick up the pieces. Enter Cassidy, a woman who wears a suit better than any man Katie knows, and whose confidence and comfort in her own skin prove irresistible. While Katie's never been attracted to a woman before, in Cassidy she finds someone who will listen to her, challenge her, and embrace her, bringing into question everything Katie thinks she knows about sex and love. Not a lot of contemporary adult fiction writers have taken on same-sex relationships, and there's no one out there writing about it the way that Camille Perri does. There are no generalizations in this book. Rather, she brings to life the deep and contemplative soul-searching that Katie takes on when she realizes that she is falling for a woman, something that she had never occurred to her that could happen. When Katie Met Cassidy is a fresh take on a romantic comedy, and it had me alternating between stitches and tears. It's filled with characters so human you'll think that you just passed them in the building lobby. It's a rare novel that blends a juicy, unputdownable story with an important and timely social message. Camille Perri is uniquely qualified to bring us into this world. She has worked as a books editor for Cosmo and Esquire, as a ghostwriter for young adult novels, and as a reference librarian. She studied English and gender and sexuality studies at NYU, and then received a Master's of Library Science degree from Queens College. She now lives in Brooklyn. Camille understands New York City, she understands young women, and she understands the LGBTQ community. She's exactly the writer to balance mainstream appeal with the resonant insider details that the queer community will love. I could not be more excited or more proud to introduce Camille Perri.
Thank you so much, Helen. That was very nice. Hello, librarians. As Helen mentioned, I am a former librarian. I got my MLS at Queens College, and I worked as a reference librarian. Queens College, somewhere in the back. I also worked as a reference librarian at the East Meadow Public Library and the Great Neck Library on Long Island. Before I was a librarian, though, I was a library page, which was the greatest job in the entire world. I loved being a page because if you got really good at it and you could get all your books shelved away really quickly, you could spend the rest of your shift reading in the stacks. Okay, I know that's not like actually allowed, but I mean, do pages still do this? Do the pages still read books in the stacks? They do. Do they? Is the page freeze still a thing? Do you know the page freeze? I'll demonstrate the page freeze really quickly. The page freeze is when you're a page and you're reading in the stacks, and then you hear a librarian coming, and you very quickly pretend to be shelving that book. So you're reading, and then you're shelving. The first time ever in my life that I felt like an adult was when, as a librarian, I walked by some stacks, and a young page did the page freeze to me. But it was a really interesting time in my life when I went from being a page in the stacks to being a librarian behind the reference desk. If you'll picture for a moment young me, early 20s, bleach blonde, buzz cut, cargo pants with a wallet chain hanging down, and big chunky Doc Marten boots. The big question at the time, when it was time for me to transition from the stacks to the reference desk, was, what's she gonna wear? Our assistant director at the time, her name was Harriet, she was very highly regarded, and I liked her very much and wanted to impress her and make her feel at peace in taking the chance on me in giving me the chance to train as a librarian trainee behind the reference desk while I was still in library school. Just before my first day, she took me aside and very politely indicated my 90s baby dyke attire and said politely, Camille, I wonder, what are you going to wear to work tomorrow? And I said, don't you worry. Don't worry. I am going to step through the door tomorrow looking like I just stepped off the pages of GQ. Now, for those of you who don't know, GQ is a men's fashion magazine. So why were these the words that came out of my mouth? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because I was as stressed out as everyone as to what I was going to wear on my first day behind the reference desk. Earlier the week, I had gone off to Ann Taylor Loft in Westbury, and I bought 2 of the most androgynous suits I could find. It was probably the most amount of money I had ever dropped on any 2 articles of clothing in my life to that point. And in fairness, what did anybody expect? That I was going to come in the door wearing a skirt and pink bows and my bleach blonde buzz cut? I mean, no, right? No, nobody expected that. And Harriet was a great sport about my suits, as were all the librarians I worked with at East Meadow for the next 6 years that I was a reference librarian there, 2 of which are here today, and I'm happy to see them. But let's fast forward. Let's fast forward to 2009. I had, through a series of weird events and coincidences, the opportunity to interview for a job at Esquire magazine. Now, it wasn't GQ, but it was pretty damn close. I had the chance to interview to be the assistant to the editor-in-chief, David Granger. And again, this question came up. What am I going to wear? What is she going to wear? I was nervous about what to wear to my interview at Esquire with David Granger. I thought maybe I should try to tone myself down or perhaps wear something a little more traditionally feminine. And I thought, no, I'm not going to do any of that. If I'm not going to get this job simply because I don't like to wear girly clothes, then this is probably not a place that I want to work anyway. So the day of the interview, I wore what I was most comfortable in, which was button-down dress shirt, blazer, and a necktie. I stepped into Granger's office, and he kind of sized me up, and he looked me up and down, and he said, "Nice tie." And I replied, with an answer I had practiced ahead of time. I said, well, if I can't flaunt my flair for men's fashion here at Esquire, where can I? And he sort of laughed, and I laughed, and that was that. I not only got that job, but every time I wore a tie or an ascot or whatever it was to Esquire, I always got a compliment from David Granger. But let's fast forward again to just 3 years ago. I got to go work as the books editor at Cosmopolitan magazine. And wouldn't you know, I had friends who've known me for years, pull me aside and say, "What are you going to wear to Cosmo?" I mean, are you going to look like this? Are you going to look like you? Because I could see you getting away with that at Esquire, but Cosmo? Now, I'm sure you're all going to be shocked when I tell you that as a kid, I was a bit of a tomboy. I hated stuff for girls. Christmas time, I wanted baseball gloves and Nerf footballs and Matchbox cars all the way. And I think this is something that's sort of common when daughters grow up with brothers. But I had 2 older sisters, 10 and 12 years older than me, so I didn't really have that excuse to fall back on. It was no secret in my house that me being the youngest and having 2 older sisters, 10 and 12 years older than me, that I was what they called a pleasant surprise, also known as an accident. And having made this accident, it was no secret that hopes were high. It would turn out to be a boy accident. You should know both my parents come from peasant Italian stock with deep roots in superstition and old wives' tales and age-old myths involving not only gender prediction during pregnancy, but gender selection during pregnancy. So like stuff like, if you want to have a baby boy, you should eat a banana on this night of the month while looking at the moon. Or like rituals involving the lunar cycle and like the Italian horns and chicken bones and like, I don't even really know what, to be honest. With spoiler alert, I came out a girl, a female child with female parts. But when I was young, like very young enough where the adults in the room talk about you when you're sitting right there as if you can't hear them or understand them. That's how young I was when I overheard my godmother talking to my mom about my predilection for boyish things. And she said, you know, do you think she's like this because of everything you did to make a boy? And the jury's still out on that one, folks. But the question stayed with me. It was, you know, this is who I am. It seems I came out of the womb this way. Whose fault is it? 20 years worth of therapy later, I've managed to reframe the question, oddly to something a little more Bronx-style Italian. This is who I am. It seems I came out of the womb this way. You got a problem with that? So here I stand before you today as myself, striving to be my most authentic self, without shame, without embarrassment, without fear. But you know, it's hard sometimes looking a little different and feeling different. Though I would bet that this is something everyone in this room here today can identify with or relate to on some level. I mean, don't we all sometimes feel like we don't belong? Or rather, like, in order to belong, in order to be liked, and those of us who are women and have been socialized as women to want to be liked, to want to be approved of, don't we all sometimes bend and shape ourselves and make life decisions based more on what our families or the culture at large wants, rather than on what will bring us the most joy? My new novel follows the path of two characters. Katie, Kentucky native, born and raised, a good girl, a people pleaser, a rule follower. And Cassidy, a native New Yorker, who on first look, Katie mistakes for a man. It's a love story between two women. One's on the more masculine side, one's on the more feminine side. One likes to wear dresses, the other likes to wear custom-made men's suits. The short answer I've been giving people when they ask, what's your new novel about, is that it's a romantic comedy about gender and sexuality. That it's about the importance of figuring out who we really are in order to go after what we truly want. A big part of me setting out to write this novel was about representation. In spite of all the progress that we've seen over the years in relation to the LGBTQ community, so much of that culture remains invisible to America at large, particularly representations that don't involve death or illness or some identity-based misfortune. In the current social and political climate of our country today, queer visibility feels, at least to me, more imperative than ever. A government under Donald Trump cannot be relied on to even provide us with guaranteed equal rights, never mind a sense of belonging. When Katie Met Cassidy is not about politics, but the fact that it exists is political, at least to me. A celebratory, queer love story in the midst of all that hatred and bigotry that's part of our daily collective conscience is, as far as I'm concerned, a form of resistance. A fun, fast-paced, accessible romantic comedy about two women free from tragedy is, in its own way, radical. this is the novel I wanted to read. So it's the novel that I wrote. Because, as they say, love is love. Gender expression aside. Dresses and neckties aside. And in the best stories, love wins. Thank you so much for listening.